Today, I am very happy to introduce Amitabh Jindal to you, who will be presenting the book that we have scheduled for today, Anthony Doerr's All the Light You Cannot See. And I think his new book, Cloud Cuckoo Land, is making waves right now. So Amitabh is a graduate of IIM Calcutta. He has his own human resources consultancy firm. He's a certified life coach. There's so much more I can tell you about him, but I'm going to just hand the mic over to him and let him begin with the book. Amitabh, thank you so much for being here. Over to you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Without much ado, I will go to the share screen and put up my PPT. I hope I'm techno-savvy enough to do it. Let me see. So as Mohini said, this is a book called All the Light We Cannot See. It is written by Anthony Doerr. And it's taken me 10 months to come back to a presentation because Satish said you all guys were full up for the last 6 months. Interesting insight, that one. This is the book cover. I'm going to start with the characters. It's sort of dramatis personae. The book covers almost 70 years, actually 80 years. The main characters are a blind girl, Mary Laurie LeBlanc, who at the beginning of the book is 6 years old. Her father, Monsieur Daniel LeBlanc, who is the principal locksmith of the Museum of Natural History in Paris. Her great uncle, Etienne, and the housekeeper of their mansion, which will come later. Then there is an orphan boy whose name is Werner Fenning, his sister. Since they are orphans, they are in a foster home. The only mother they know is Frau Elina. She used to be a nun in Alsace. Frederick is Werner's friend, more of him a bit later. Dr. Hoffman is his instructor. Frank Wolkheimer is his protector, self-appointed. And there is an officer called Bastian, who's the bully in the school in which Werner goes. There is another character, albeit it is not human, and that is a stone, a diamond, which carries a story behind it. It is called the Sea of Flames. It is a huge diamond, which through its facets throws up, flames, figurative flames. And then there is a German collector whose name is von Rumpel. The story revolves around 4 locations. Obviously, the Museum of Natural History in Paris. Zollverein is where Werner and his sister grew up, the children's house, which is called Victoria Strasse. Then a third location is the National Political Institute of Education, where Werner is deputed. And the end of the story, actually, the novel figures at Saint Malo. Now, there are 2 locations in Saint Malo. There is a Hotel of Bees, and there is 4 Rue Vauborel. It is basically 3 stories which intertwine involving the characters. One is that of the blind girl, Marie Laurie, and the affection and love that her father, great uncle, and housekeeper have for her through occupied France during World War II. This journey takes her through her journey of independence, this part of the story. The second is the journey of a gifted and intelligent German orphan from a steel mining town who becomes a conscript in the German army and how he uses his talents to survive. And the third is that of a German diamante being a jeweler or an expert in stones, who's on the quest for the Sea of Flames as a part of the German loot during the war. Right at the beginning of the novel, tragedy starts with Marie-Laure losing all her eyesight. At the age of 6, she loses eyesight. What is blindness? Where there should be a wall, her hands find nothing. Where there should be nothing, a table leg gouges her shin. There are months of bruises and wretchedness, rooms pitching like sailboats, etc., etc. Basically, the insight, the inner life of a blind young girl, penned by the author beautifully. Now, unfortunately, the book is very long, so I have not been able to capture many of the nuggets that are there in the novel. This is one of them. This is a verbatim quote from the beginning of the novel. Note here, while her father in the chair beside her, whittling away at one of his tiny models, his little hammer going tap, 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 his little square of sandpaper making a rhythmic, soothing rasp. Please keep this in mind because this will be relevant later. Now, I am taking the story across on its 3 dimensions. Red is the story of Marie-Laure, black is the story of Werner, and later blue is the story of the Diamante. So Werner is an orphan in a mining town in Germany. He lives in an orphanage which is presided over by Frau Helena, a nun from Alsace, and about 15 children from the age of 2 to 16. This guy is a little genius. He keeps himself occupied by playing with his little sister and making small things handcrafted by himself, which he assembles from cast-off parts in the mining town. He makes a cart for his little sister, and both of them spend the day with him pulling his little sister all across the mining town. One fine day, he is ferreting about and he comes across a large spool of wire thread actually. It consists of a wire-tap cylinder sandwiched between 2 discs of pine wood, and so on. Essentially, he is able to convert this into a small radio. That is in the last 3 lines. From somewhere deep inside the earpiece, he hears a piano and a violins. He has assembled a radio for the orphanage. He has begun his journey as a radio man. Now, I was attempting to put down some graphics, but I was unable to do it. I'm technically challenged to that extent. It would have, added context to the entire presentation. This is a graphic of a little miner from the 1940s. Back to Marie-Laure. He is the principal locksmith for the National Museum of Natural History. Now, he is saddled because Laurie does not have a mother. She passed away. She has only her father to look up to. And Monsieur, what's his name? Leblanc, yeah, is saddled with not only bringing up a daughter, but bringing up a blind daughter. So what does he do? He uses his skills as a locksmith to make small little models and miniatures for his daughter and teaches her by physical touch to understand what is what. Since he is the locksmith, he has access to a huge number of keys and locks. So she is able to identify different keys and locks by touch. He tests her on the location of displays, on the contents of cabinets. He places unexpected things into her hands, a light bulb, a fossilized fish, a flamingo feather. For an hour each morning, even Sundays, he makes her sit over her Braille workbook. And she learns the alphabet A, B, C, D, etc., and the dots and dashes associated with the alphabet. She is able to then start spelling. The baker, Jean, goes to the cheese maker. 6 mornings a week, he wakes her before dawn, dresses her up, morning and winter, morning and evening, summer and winter. And At 6:40, she collects her white cane from the corner, loops a finger through the back of her father's belt, and follows him down 4 flights and up 6 blocks to the museum. The word picture is pretty. A 6-year-old girl waking up early in the morning, taking on her cane, looping her finger around her father's belt, and then being led to the museum 6 blocks down, 4 flights down. This slide is important. Now, her father has placed evenly spaced friction strips on the kitchen tiles to reach the table so that she can count the steps to the kitchen table. He's rigged up a strand of wine from the bed, from the table to the toilet. He serves dinner as a physical exercise. He describes the location of the food as if it is a clock on the plate. Potatoes at 6 o'clock, mushrooms at 3 o'clock, and so on. He challenges her to count the number of pages just by touching them at a bookstore. How many pages, Marie Laurie? She runs a nail along the edge, 52, 705, 139. Again, the word picture is clear. Here is a child being educated to look after herself through just her senses, one of which is missing, and that is eyesight. He makes wooden puzzle boxes for her birthdays. They're something like those babushka Russian dolls, one inside the other. Opening them involves a cunning series of steps. Find a seam with your fingernails, slide the bottom to the right, detach a side rail, remove a hidden key from inside the rail, unlock the top, and discover a gift. Each box has a gift for her. Meanwhile, he's whittling away, and ultimately he makes a small miniature model of his neighborhood for his daughter, and pushes her into identifying the streets, the roads, the buildings, the stores, the library, the courthouse, and the museum. She has to memorize all this to get along. One cold Tuesday in December, after Mary Laurie has been studying this model for over a year, her father walks her up to the Rue Cuvier, to the edge of the Jardin des Plantes. That's the local park. He picks her up and spins her around 3 times. That is to confuse her sense of direction. Now he challenges her, you got to take us home. Think of the model, Mari. Don't worry, I'm 1 step behind you. I won't let anything happen to you. And then slowly and steadily, 6 blocks right, use logic, which way should we go first? And so starts her education in becoming an independent blind girl who can navigate for herself. This model of the town is important later in the story. In the winter of her 8th year, which means 2 years later, she runs her fingers over the model in their kitchen, counting miniature benches, trees, lampposts, doorways. Every day some new detail emerges. Each storm drain, each park bench, each hydrant in the model has its counterpart in the real world. Imagine the labor of love that her father has spent in creating this for his daughter. On her 9th birthday, she gets 2 gifts. One is a normal box, which she turned this way, that way. And the second is a heavy book in Braille, which is Around the World in 80 Days. If you all remember, this is Phileas Fogg and Passepartout. There is a sentence here. Can you ever imagine hearing someone smile? We have always heard that if one loses one sense, the other senses make up for it. Here is an example of the author writing where the young girl can actually hear her father smile. Color, even though she's blind. In her imagination, everything has color. The museum buildings are beige, chestnut, hazel. Its scientists are lilac and lemon yellow and fox brown. Piano chords, which is music, projecting rich blacks and complicated blues down the hall. Even music has color. Sound has color. Church bells is bronze. Bees are silver. Pigeons are ginger and auburn and occasionally gold. Back to Werner. He's a young kid, very inquisitive, very curious. And he keeps asking questions of Frau Elena, who tries to answer them as best as she can. If the moon is so big, how come it looks so little? Now, remember, this is a 9-year-old kid. Does a bee know when it is going to die if it stings somebody? It's something like there's questions when little kids ask, why is water wet? Or why is air cool? You don't have the answers to them. Mothers would empathize with this. He refines his radio, and every evening he carries it downstairs, and Frau Elena lets her wards listen to it for an hour. This is just pre-war. So the radio is full of Nazi propaganda. The elder kids in the orphanage have already started strutting around as Hitler Youth. Frau Elena is scared that the other boys will also be conscripted. He keeps himself busy by again continuing to ask questions relating to mechanics, relating to electronics, etc. Incidentally and casually, he is able to repair a neighbor's sewing machine. He repairs the grandfather clock in the orphanage. A neighbor's wireless goes out and he repairs that, and his reputation travels across ultimately to the commandant of the town, the Nazi commandant of the town, who's Herr Seidler. He's got a massive American Philco radio, which has gone kaput. So Seidler, with rather cynically, asks Werner whether he can repair that. And Werner successfully repairs that radio. So Seidler is so impressed with him that first of all, he gives him 75 marks, which is a huge amount of money at that time. And he also refers Werner to General Heissmeyer's technical schools, which are considered the best schools for technology and engineering for youngsters in Germany. Werner comes back and hands back all those 75 marks to his orphanage mother, who's astonished and keeps 25 and gives 50 back to him. Innocent, naive, curious, genius boy. And he finally gets that letter calling him to report to the Political Institute of Education at Schulporta, where he now realizes that he has found a way out of the orphanage. Meanwhile, his sister is equally inquisitive, but she is wise beyond her years. She's 3 years younger. And she is commenting about these Hitler Youth who are going around being aggressive and beating people, etc. And she says, is it right to do something only because everyone else is doing it? Doubts start creeping into his mind and Jutta's mind, but he pushes them back. Mary Laurie's education continues. And now she has a second package where her father has gifted her 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, again in Braille. I've omitted to mention this, but 20,000 Leagues is a metaphor for this entire novel. The adventure of Nemo and his crew in the Nautilus is a metaphor for both these children as they find their way through war-torn Germany. It is a very expensive book, yet he manages somehow to get it for her, at least the first volume. Meanwhile, Germans have started occupying Paris. So she and her father flee from Paris and they travel across the roads which are filled with other refugees and other people who are traveling. On the way, there is a immense tenderness on the part of the father, where he pulls off her stockings to inspect her heels. They are bleeding. Her feet feel as light as birds. And she asks him, because they are in the countryside and they're going to spend the night in the countryside, he describes the noises and the sounds in the countryside. A poignant moment where she asks him, is it dark? Because she doesn't know whether it's dark or light. And he tells her it is getting there now. They spend the nights in local barns or in the open. And finally, he says to her, okay, we will now go visit my uncle, who's your great uncle in Saint Malo. He's partially crazy, yes, maybe he's 75% crazy. A pause here. This Uncle Etienne has been a soldier during World War I and suffered from what is now called PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And he lost his mind. So he's become so scared that he doesn't venture out of his room at all. And he hears sounds and noises where there are none, but more of that later. And that is why this sentence, he's partially crazy, yes, maybe 76%. Well, that's hardly accurate, but part humor, part accuracy. So this gentleman, Etienne, is the brother of her actual grandfather. Got a bit of gas in his head is how they used to say it. This is how they described it. He sees things, what things? Things that are not there. Sort of schizophrenia, PTSD, all that locked into one. They find their way to the great uncle's house. And the old housekeeper, Madame Manek, opens the door. Now, Madame Manek was the housekeeper when her father was born in this house. So she's been there 3 generations. And Laurie is introduced to Madame Manek, who now becomes a second foster mother, or rather first foster mother, sorry. They are none so distant that fate cannot bring them together. And they were famished, so they are fed dinner and they move into this house. She describes the great uncle. This is Manek speaking. Now, her grandfather, Marie Laurie's grandfather, was also a genius who assembled radios and transmitters. They were a rich family. So as she says, I have worked here since Master Etienne was a little boy. And she's into her 3rd generation of the LeBlanc family. Talking of the great uncle, he was lost, a mouse in a trap. He saw dead people passing through the walls. Terrible things in the corners of the street. Now your great uncle does not go anywhere at all. So Werner sleeps in this tiny dormitory. Frederick is his friend and his bunkmate. He has the bunk above him. Frederick is a gentle boy, a soft boy who's fond of ornithology. He's very knowledgeable about birds. And he's a bit lost in this very macho, very aggressive environment where the Hitler youth are taught ruthlessness. Some of you might know that the Nazis taught youngsters, they gave them puppies to bring up to maturity at 3 or 4 years old. These same boys were asked to kill these puppies that they had brought up as a part of building their character and their strength. So Frederick and Werner are in an institute which follows the same line of discipline, character building, and strength. A rosy-cheeked and diminutive instructor is their science instructor. He is Mr. Hauptmann. On the first day, Hauptmann challenges them to assemble a circuit based on a paper diagram. He gives them 1 hour, and Werner is able to do it in 1 minute. Impressed by that, he asks Werner to make a simple motor. And Werner is able to do it again in 15 seconds. Werner is asked, "What more can you do, cadet?" And he says, "I can make a doorbell, I can do a Morse beacon, I can do an ohm meter." In short, he is a wizard with electricals. And Werner becomes Hauptmann's protege and learns triangulation for locating an object in 3 planes from Hauptmann. Now, this is an important skill. More of this later. Wolkheimer is again another student there. He's 17 years old, but he's a giant. The other boys are scared of him. He's called the giant by them. But for some reason, Wolkheimer is appointed as the protector of Werner by Hauptmann. So Wolkheimer keeps sitting in a corner while Werner keeps doing his classes with Hauptmann. But like most giant men of pure strength, Wolkheimer has a soft side to him. He is fond of classical music. He has a gentle touch. He can play the piano. Now, Mari has been in this townhouse for 3 days. She has not met her great uncle. One fine day, while walking down the staircase, she finds 1 shell, and then a second, and then a third, and then a fourth, something like Hansel and Gretel following a trail of breadcrumbs. And the trail of seashells leads up to her granduncle's room. And from inside the room, there is a small whisper which says, "Come in." Monsieur Leblanc has radios, different types of radios. The biggest of one is in the attic. Some of these have been assembled by himself, some by his brother. His brother had, along with Monsieur Etienne, recorded passages relating to science and music, etc., on a phonograph that he himself had created. The great uncle seems curious. He seems entirely sane, very still, the stillness of a tree, of a mouse blinking in the dark. This is a verbatim quote. Granduncle and grandniece, they start living in a make-believe world. "Bonsoir," she says to Etienne. "I am a brave French explorer who has come to help you with your adventures." So Etienne responds, "Why don't you come to the jungle with me and eat these butterflies? They are as big as dinner plates and may not be poisonous, who knows?" "I would love to eat your butterflies, Monsieur Darwin." But first, I will eat these cookies. Between maturity and childlikeness. They play a flying couch. Both of them sit on the couch and make believe that they are flying through different parts of the world, whether it is Tahiti or Mozambique or Santiago. A bond between the great uncle and the great niece builds. Werner realizes that Frederick is in the grip of a dream. It's birds, always birds. Sometimes it's Arctic terns. Sometimes the migratory creatures. Finally, Frederick fails in a test of stamina for the boys and is beaten senseless as a part of strengthening and character building of the boys. He suffers a brain injury. Warner carries the guilt of not standing up for his friend, and this remains with him throughout the novel. This is just an extract to understand the sort of education that was being given at this institute. Entropy is the degree of randomness or disorder in a system. Disorder. Now, here comes the Nazism and this entire thing, the German way of life during the war. There must be order. Life is chaos, gentlemen. And what we here represents Nazi Germany, represent is an ordering to that chaos, even down to the genes. We are ordering the evolution of the species. Here are traces of the Holocaust and the persecution of the Jews, the Gypsies, the Romanians, etc. This is the great project of the Reich, the greatest project human beings have ever embarked upon. The entropy of a closed system never decreases. Every process must by law decay. Sublimity is the instant when one thing is about to become something else. Day to night, caterpillar to butterfly, fawn to doe, boy to man. Werner becomes a man very early, as early as the age of 16. He is conscripted by the German army after his period at the institute, and he becomes a radio man and travels all over occupied France and the other occupied territories, along with Wolkheimer and two other soldiers. Their sole job is to identify resistance transmitters and destroy them. There is poverty amongst the German army, especially around 1942-43, after the Russian invasion. Equipment is in short supply. So Wolkheimer and his team take to forcibly taking away stuff from other prisoners of war as they drive in their battered jeep. And because Wolkheimer is so big, there is no way any prisoner will refuse. But Wolkheimer and his team take only what is necessary and they give back what is not okay for them. So, woolen shirt, battered coat, boots. Boots are the toughest thing to take off the prisoners because they will not be able to manage the winter without boots. Again, this paragraph or this chapter actually gives the hopelessness of the army and the German war effort during the later part of the war. One interesting part of the novel is that no chapter is longer than 3 pages. Since there are 3 stories intertwined, the author doesn't want the reader to get lost in one story and forget the other one. So there is a repeated switching between the different characters in the book. Finally, 18 shows Marie-Laure the hidden transmitter in the attic at the top of their townhouse. The path to the attic is through a wardrobe, which is cunningly concealed When he takes her there, there is a grand piano in the attic also. And there, when she wears the headpiece, and now this is an important part of the novel, she listens to this conversation from her grandfather, where the grandfather is transmitting a class on a lesson on diamonds and coal. The same passage has been listened to by Werner and his sister in the mining town when he had created that little radio for himself. Now, this is where the story starts coalescing somewhat. The same transmission had been listened to by Werner and Jutta in their mining town. In Saint Malo, there is a greedy baker whose name is Claude Levitt, who's on the lookout for opportunity, and he ingratiates himself with the German army by being a spy and being a snitch. And he hands over Monsieur Leblanc to the German army, suspecting that Leblanc is actually measuring the town and passing on these dimensions through the resistance. Whereas actually Leblanc is measuring the town to make another small miniature township for his daughter. He betrays the law, and Monsieur Leblanc is arrested by the Germans for no reason except for suspicion of espionage. A little aside here. The French Museum in Paris was the custodian of the Sea of Flames, the big diamond. So when Paris was being bombed, the director of the museum, for safekeeping, got 3 other miniature duplicates made of the Sea of Flames. And he sent out these 4 stones in 4 different directions with 4 different persons whom he trusted. None of the 4 knew who had the original diamond. I am giving you a spoiler. The original diamond is with Monsieur Leblanc, who has carried it to Saint Malo. Leblanc receives a telegram from the museum asking him to report directly to Paris as quickly as he can, but he should travel securely. Unfortunately, Leblanc is captured by the Germans on his way to Paris. Before leaving, he finishes this model of Saint Malo for his daughter. It is unpainted, it is imperfect. It is not as good as he would have liked it to be, but it is complete enough for his daughter to understand where she is and how she can navigate. There are 865 buildings that he has put in place. Now we come to the third part of the novel. Von Rumpel is an expert in diamonds and stones. He can facet and polish stones as well as any Aryan jeweler in Europe, and he often spots fakes at a glance. He has been conscripted by the German army to assess and evaluate and revalue all the jewelry and stones that the Nazis were capturing all over all the countries that they had occupied. Just a few examples are given by the author. I've just taken 2. 17th century globe, big as round as a small car, with rubies to mark volcanoes, sapphires clustered at the poles, and diamonds for world capitals. A 570 piece of china set with a single marquee cut diamond set into the rim of every single dish. And he comes to know of the existence of the Sea of Flames, grayish blue with a red hue at its center, recorded at 133 carats, either lost or willed to the King of France in 1738 on the condition that it be locked away for 200 years. The myth and the legend around this stone is that whoever possesses it will never die, as long as he or she keeps it with him, but everyone around that person will die. After all his wanderings around the occupied countries, Warner is finally relocated to Saint Malo, where it is suspected that there is a resistance transmitter which is broadcasting. Madame Manek, the housekeeper, has organized a small network, a resistance network with the women, and they ask Etienne to broadcast different locations, different distances and coordinates every evening for the Allied forces. Now, these transmissions have been caught by the Germans, but they cannot locate the transmitter. Werner and his mates are housed in the Hotel of the Bees. This is the best hotel in Saint Malo. And during the bombing of Saint Malo, they go to the cellar of the hotel for protection, but unfortunately they get trapped there and they are entombed. Now, in their cement and concrete tomb, they don't have very much. One of their mates dies. They have only 2 canteens of water, each is half empty. There is a bucket of paintbrushes in a corner with some watery sludge at the bottom, which they will drink at complete desperation later on. The battery of his old transmitter is dying, but being the jugaad guy that he is able to connect this transmitter and make it live with some old batteries that they find in the cellar. And Wolkheimer uses his last grenade at considerable risk to themselves to blast a hole for them to escape through. So they leave the cellar, and to protect Warner, Wolkheimer pushes them away in a different direction, and Wolkheimer goes in the opposite direction, knowing full well that if they are together, they will get captured by the Allied armies that are coming in. Rumpel, meanwhile, goes to the museum, connects with the director, and the director, after great persuasion and a degree of torture, finally takes him to the strong room where Rumpel finds an interesting box, beautiful joinery, invisible joinery, no combination Doyle, no discernible engines. There is nothing to explain that it can open. However, the director and his assistant know how to open it. They fit a small key into a tiny, almost invisible hole, which opens to show 2 more tiny holes, and so on till ultimately the box completely falls open. And there, in a small felt bag, Rumpel finds 1 blue stone as big as a pigeon's egg. Now, Rumpel does not know whether this is the Sea of Flames or not. He does know that it may be the replica of the Sea of Flames. As I said earlier, the museum director had commissioned Dupont, who was himself a diamante, to fashion 3 more replicas of the Sea of Flames. Von Rumpel now traces each of these stones and finally is left with the last one, which he knows is with the locksmith, whose address is given to him by this guy Dupont under torture. So one fake at the museum, one at the home of a museum supporter, one with the chief of security. So where is the fourth one? He tracks down the locksmith's flat in Paris, discovers his handiwork, making miniature models and puzzle boxes. As I said, meanwhile, Madame Manek has organized a small women's resistance group. She ropes in Etienne to transmit locations and coordinates, etc. Madame Manek unfortunately dies of consumption. That is TB and influenza put together. Etienne is heartbroken. Marie-Laure does not know what to do. And finally, Etienne does come out after 4 days and tells the other women who are gathered around there that, look, thank you very much. I must look after myself and my niece. Her uncle now gives her 2 volumes of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in Braille for her 16th birthday. So we now know that Marie-Laure has grown from 9 years old to 16 years old. This is a nice passage. Again, this is symptomatic and evocative of the sort of writing the author has done. This is referring to Saint Malo, where the German squads are coming around, rounding up people, and no one knows who will be captured or who will be executed. The bony figure of death rides the streets below, stopping his 1 minute. And then he peers into windows, horns of fire on his head and smoke leaking from his nostrils, and in skeletal hand, a list newly charged with addresses. Gazing first at the crew of officers unloading from their limousines into the chateau, then at the glowing rooms of the perfumer Claude Levitt, then at the dark, tall house of Etienne's Leblanc. Passes by a horseman, passed his house by, and Etienne is spared. Werner has been able to triangulate the antenna. He follows the blind girl from the bakery and he falls for her. He's smitten. He falls in love with her. But Werner does not confide this about the location of the transmitter, neither to Wolkheimer nor to the authorities. Meanwhile, Laurie Marie has started transmitting from the transmitter after her uncle disappears, and she starts reading out from the Nautilus. In the chapter that she reads out, which she listens to, there is an allegory of the Nautilus itself being entombed where it strikes an iceberg. And Werner finds this very evocative because the submarine is under ice and he is entombed under concrete. While they are entombed, Werner plays music for Wolkheimer. Wolkheimer loses himself in the piano scales. And as I said earlier, they find their way out. Rumpel has been diagnosed with a stomach tumor. He has only 4 months left. There is an urgency in him. And finally, he is led by Claude the perfumer, who betrayed Leblanc. And Claude betrays Leblanc again and gives Rumpel the address at Saint Malo. I made it very concise because there's a lot of description that follows here about Marie-Laure's struggles as a blind girl in a house where both Her housekeeper and her uncle are missing, and she is all alone. The courage that she shows, the anxieties that she has, and her will to live. So while she is there, she realizes that the outer gate closed before the door, which means whoever it is, close the gate first, then shut the door, which means that person is Rumpel. He is inside the house. She listens to boots in the foyer, fragments of dishes crunching underfoot. She realizes it is not 18 because 18 would have been careful. And then she recognizes the footfalls from an earlier footfall that she had listened to on her way from the bakery home some weeks back. It is evident that the person is struggling because the rhythm of the footsteps is 1, pause, 2, 1, pause, 2. The limp of a German sergeant major with a dead voice. I've already read this out earlier. She keeps using the transmitter to keep transmitting. And finally, he remembers one sentence that her father had told her before he disappeared. Remember your birthdays? There were always 2 things on the table when you woke. If you ever wish to understand, look inside 18's house, inside the house, thereby implying that Marie-Laure should look at the miniature township that her father has made for her of Saint Malo. And the gift for her lies in the miniature townhouse in the miniature township. She does pick up that house, that miniature house. Doesn't take her long to solve the problem. Twist the chimney 90 degrees, slide off the roof panels, 1, 2, 3, and she turns the little house over, and there falls into her hand a pear-shaped stone, which is actually the original Sea of Flames. Meanwhile, Rumpel has found the model house. He discovers there's one little tiny house missing. He looks around, discovers the wardrobe doors, but doesn't realize that there is a hidden door in that wardrobe. Marie-Laure has heard him. She waits for him to leave, opens a false panel, and comes out. Marie-Laure is now playing music on the transmitter, and Rumpel hears the music coming from somewhere above him. The battery dies, the sounds stop, and he traces the trail to the big wardrobe, from there to the attic. Unfortunately, in straightening up, looking for that hidden door, he hits his head against the top of the door of the wardrobe, and the candle he is carrying sets the curtain in the room on fire. She realizes that she has the Sea of Flames whose legend she had listened to from the director at the museum. She realizes that Rumpel is looking for this stone. She is tempted to throw it away and continues reading the Nautilus story, and remembers this phrase. Thus to that question asked 6,000 years ago by Ecclesiastes, that which is far off and exceeding deep, who can find it out? Only two men now have the right to answer, Captain Nemo and myself. This is the raconteur who is who describes the entire novel. Here again is the metaphor. The search for the stone is linked to the Nautilus quest. I would have actually liked to quote much more from the Nautilus story, but I had to make this very much more concise. I was already at 120 slides, and I realized that this won't do. So I cut it out and I reduced it to 60 slides. I hope I'm doing justice to the story. This is again a verbatim quote. What mazes there are in the world, the branches of trees, the filigree of roots, the matrix of crystals. The streets her father recreated on a model, mazes in the nodules on murex shells and in the textures of sycamore bark and inside the hollow bones of eagles. None more complicated than the human brain. What may be the most complex object in existence? One wet kilogram within which spin universes. And the book is full of these sort of paras. Werner, meanwhile, has found his way to the townhouse. They meet each other. They have a conversation. And Werner has killed Rumpel in an encounter because Rumpel has pulled out his revolver and Werner is carrying his rifle. Werner puts out the flames and the two, Werner and Mary, leave the townhouse, and Werner, for her safety, pushes her in the opposite direction and he goes in the opposite direction. Fortunately, 18 and Mary are reunited and they go back to Paris to the original house where Marie used to live. Werner's sister has been conscripted as slave labor along with Frau Elena and 3 other girls, and all 5 of them were raped by the incoming Russian army. The book now shifts to 1974, which means it takes a 30-year jump. Wolkheimer is 51 years old. He has no children, no pets, no houseplants. He is basically a TV antenna repairman. He keeps remembering the war, and one fine day he receives a small package in the mail from the Veterans Service Organization. This consists of the model house, a soft covered rectangular. This is the small model house of 18's townhouse. A rectangular notebook with a single word across it, Fragen, which in German means questions. And he realizes that this belonged to Werner. Jutta, Werner's sister, teaches algebra in Essen. She's married. She has a son who's 6 years old and who's very fond of origami, making paper planes. Wolkheimer discovers Jutta's address from the Veterans Organization, visits Jutta and hands over a letter and the duffel bag containing the packages he had received, the model house, the diary, and the key. Jutta in turn finds out the address of Marie-Laure and travels to Saint Malo first, from where she is given the address of Marie-Laure in Paris. And she travels to Marie-Laure and hands over the packages to Marie-Laure. Marie-Laure, meanwhile, in spite of her blindness, manages a small laboratory at the Museum of Natural History in Paris. She is an expert in mollusks and other sea crustaceans. She has a daughter named Helene, who's now 19. The book then jumps to 2014. Mari is now a grandmother. She has a grandson who's 12 years old, whose name is Michel. And I end this presentation with this quote from the book. And is it so hard to believe that souls might also travel those paths, electromagnetic waves, that a father in 18 and Madame Manek and the German boy named Werner might harry the sky in flocks like egrets, like terns, like starlings? That great shuttles of souls might fly about, faded but audible, if you listen closely enough. The air a library, and the record of every life saved, every sentence spoken, every word transmitted, still reverberating within it. The allegory being that Wolkheimer, Jutta, Marie-Laure finally come together, albeit at different locations, over one stone. From a memory, Dr. Geffard whispers. Dr. Geffard was one of the keepers at the museum. That something so small could be so beautiful, the diamond, worth so much. Only the strongest people can turn away from feelings like that. She twists the chimney 90 degrees. It turns as smoothly as if her father had just built it. When she tries to slide out the first of the 3 wooden panels, she finds it stuck. But with the end of the pen, she manages to lever off panels 1, 2, 3. Something drops into her palm, and that is the iron key. Now, this iron key, which I have not referred to earlier, actually is the steel gate of a grotto in Saint Malo, where she had gone and dropped the diamond at high tide when the sea used to visit that grotto, knowing full well that the diamond would be safe there and it would not disappear. The book ends with this iron key falling into her palm. So that is it. It is difficult to actually put in concise form a book that runs through 356 pages. I would urge those of you who have not read it, the story is itself very simplistic, but it is fairly evocative, and there are beautiful pieces of writing by Doerr throughout the book. I think I have not overstayed my welcome. I have overstated myself.
By 2 minutes only, 5 minutes only. Don't worry. No.
Right.
Amitabh, great. Very well told. Really brought life into the picture about the book, etc. So, anyone with questions, please raise your hand.
If I could just begin until other people think of their questions. Amitabh, you said the novel was 356 pages, right?
Yes.
I was so surprised to hear that, because when you told the story, it seemed so intricate.
It is very intricate.
So many aspected. It is so layered.
Yes.
The characters are so fascinating, So I thought this must be a very long novel.
I'll tell you exactly how many pages. I've got the hard copy and the soft copy.
No, I mean, I thought this must be something like an 800-page novel,
Actually, I am wrong. It is more than that. It is 530 pages.
Well,
yeah, sounds like that.
I mean, there's so much to it, and there is so much. Am I right in understanding that there is such an aura of enigma? There's such an aura of enigma. Like, this is a puzzle. and you do not
Yes.
know the answer, and you wait. There must be so much suspense, tremendous suspense in the novel.
Not really suspense.
No? Okay.
Not really suspense, but what there is, and that is what I would have loved to bring out, is the metaphor of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That is one. And the other one being Around the World in 80 Days. Both being metaphors for the curiosity of the two kids.
Right.
Because Around the World in 80 Days, also, if you all have read it, those of us who have read it would remember that there were lots of little surprises that kept coming in their journey as they went around the world.
Right.
And of course, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is a delight for any kid at the age of 13, 14 to have read.
Yes, yes. So would you say that it is a very dense book, or did you find that it was a
It's
leisurely?
an easy read. It's an easy read.
It's a leisurely narration. Okay, okay.
It's an easy.
But am I right that there is a sense of enigma all the time, or not really? It seemed to me.
Well, I would think every chapter brings out a surprise because the story twists and turns different way.
Okay, okay. Last thing I want to say is that because you told it in such a deadpan, calm way, I think if anything, it emphasized, all the fascinating things that happen and the nuances of these amazing characters.
Maybe I'm not a good storyteller.
Okay.
No,
but what I want to say is that I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is clearly a good writer. I love the many aspectedness of the novel. And as you say, especially the use of these two other novels, within the novel in the way that he has done. Terrific.
There are actually three metaphors in this. Two are the novels themselves. The third is the intricate joinery of the models that her father does.
Yeah. Right.
Because you solve a puzzle and you get a little gift, and each chapter is a small puzzle.
Brilliant writing. And
very nice. We enjoyed it.
Thank
I think someone wants to, Indu, you want to ask a question, have a question or a comment?
The idea of this blind girl and therefore the reaching out, the sensing of the model, the father making the models for the child and trying to reach out to her about familiarizing her with the world. They have made that particular sequence and the connection with Werner and with the stories of these two, the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and days as a kind of key. I think it is like a key.
My power has gone off. That's okay. It doesn't matter. My network is working.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, any other questions? Suggestions?
Did you hear her or not?
Not very clearly.
Like a key, the reference to both those novels.
We've lost Indu.
Yeah, I think something happened.
Has been breaking up.
For example, through the book, there are many vivid descriptions of her counting the number of gutters and the number of lampposts so that she can memorize it and find her way back. There's an entire chapter on how she navigates within Paris when her father spins her around 3 times and leaves her. And the feeling of joy both father and daughter have when she actually does guide them back home successfully.
Amitabh, I think Indu wants to ask a question again.
Yeah. Okay.
Indu, come close to the mic.
Yeah. The whole connection between 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Round the World in 80 Days, and the link that the author makes is to emphasize that the child through these books is able to live a present reality and understand how to cope with that, the war situation, and with the Rumpel coming in. I felt that was the kind of a key to the whole story. If you felt that was some link between the two points that the author made. Dual.
Okay, Mushtaba? Mushtaba, would you like to ask a question? Okay, I think more.
Yeah, we won't linger too long today because everyone is eager to, at least those in India are eager to watch the match. So you wind
I
up.
think a lot of ladies are also into Karwa Chauth. I don't know whether you all guys do it in West India. North India.
Well, I know. Well, some people do it, I know. I hadn't thought of that. Anyway, so Amitabh, thank you very much. I think everyone
Thank you very much.
enjoyed it. Yes, Farooq would like to make an announcement. Farooq, you want to make it now or after I've told about?
After you're finished.
So, okay. So now let me just tell you about next time's event. Next Sunday, 31st October, we have a book called Seed of the Jungle God by Dr. Raza Tehsin, who's one of our leading nature conservationists. So he's written about wildlife, he's discovered new species of beings and so on and so forth. And his daughter, Arifa, is going to be the presenter. So that sounds very, very interesting. On the 7th, we were to have Sanjay Phadke with Weapons of Math Destruction, but he has asked for a little more time. So I'm requesting anyone who is a presenter in the month of November or December, would you like to prepone your talk to 7th of November and exchange dates with Sanjay? That's a question. And I have a very lovely announcement. And if Latika is still there,
No, she is not there.
She's not. Oh, that's a pity. But Latika is the one who has organized this for us entirely. So now Gyan Adab and the book club have an association with Alliance Francaise and the French Institute, which is the French embassy. And we are going to collaborate to give you events, that is talks, films, and so on to do with France. And as an opening session, day after tomorrow, on Tuesday, we have a film, a webinar, basically, with a speaker who's going to talk about Berthe Morisot, who was a French Impressionist painter. Now, we've all heard of, the usual people, Monet, Manet, Renoir, Matisse, Degas, Cézanne, Rodin, Sargent. These are all the famous Impressionist painters. No one has heard of Berthe Morisot. And the reason, according to the speaker, is that she was a woman. But she's going to talk to us about her as an Impressionist artist. So this is the first of a number of events which the French Embassy and Alliance Francaise will be bringing to us. We also are working on a set of films that we will be invited to see and will be discussing. And Latika is the one who has made this association possible. So I'd like to thank her very much. And now the final word with Farooq.
First of all, I would like to thank Amitabh Jindal for a fantastic rendering of the story. I think he did a fantastic job. I think Satish and Moini will agree. Very rarely we get somebody making such a deep presentation. What I want to inform everyone is that under the banner of Gyanadab, that is Gyanpedia, that is the knowledge-based program that we have, we will be bringing our next program. Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah.
Next Saturday at 7 p.m. we are having Milind Halbe, who is a mountaineer He's a specialist in yoga breathing. He's a photographer. He's an astrophotographer. And he'll be taking our 5th program on Gyanpedia at 7 p.m. I'll be putting all the creatives on the WhatsApp page and the emailer and everything. And Mohini, regarding the French programs, we need to work out how we can get them onto our creatives and on our website so people can, click and come to know about it, because it's very new,
Right.
very quick. So
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, this really came together over the last couple of weeks.
it has come very quick.
Today, yeah, today we have discovered this program that we can share day after tomorrow. So
Right.
indeed, we need to see how we can.
And
In fact, I'll be sending you all details how you can log in, etc. Either tonight or tomorrow morning, I'll send you all the details.
And on the 13th of November, we are having an Urdu program on the famous poet Nida Fazli. So we'll be covering Nida Fazli, just like we covered Ghulam Abbas and Kaif Azmi and all the things. So looking forward that everybody joins it, and we'll be putting those creators on. From my side, presently these 2 programs, and now the French program that we are going to run.
Thank you. Thank you, Mo.
I think the Gyan Adab and Book Club team can congratulate ourselves. Honestly, we're doing such wonderful things. And I'm so happy to be able to tell everyone that, hey, we have this as well. It's a banquet. We're offering you a banquet, folks. Come and partake.
Yes, congratulations, Mohini and Gyan Adab.
And you talked about banquet. There's also a talk on food. The French food and all that is also big.
It's in the pipeline.
It's in the pipeline.
All right. Right. So
The
thank you.
permission of
Thank you.
everybody, can I end the program, Mohini?
Yes, please. Yes.
Please,
Thank you, everybody, for being
Thank you,
here,
everyone.
especially Amitabh.
And thank you, Abid.
He's switched off. He's had to.
No, he's there. He's very much alive.
Oh, is he?
Hello,
Bye,
okay.
everyone. Bye-bye.